focuses on culture. So today I will be talking about defining culture, changing ideas about culture and human behavior, culture concepts, postmodern view of culture, cultural maintenance, change and adaptation, and also implications for social work. So according to Hutchison, culture includes both material outcomes and the behavior. At the same time, it is our in our head. So what does this mean? It means that culture starts with our beliefs, and beliefs translate into certain behaviors, and material things or artifacts are also part of um, sometimes how we express or are symbols of our culture. For example, in terms of beliefs, um, if we're talking about family and parenting, um, among Latino families, parents may have the belief about familismo, which means that families are very close together and um, families are put above individual choices and also above individual success. So it is not uncommon, for example, for family members to help each other out during difficult times. Um, for example, during COVID, that many immigrant families lost their jobs, and maybe if they didn't qualify for the stimulus package, they came together to help each other out during these difficult moments. It is also not uncommon if children, for example, are not married, even if they are um, over 18 years old, for them to still live at the home because that's part of the parents and the family's culture. I'm not saying that again that all the Latino families have the same beliefs, but it is part of the culture. It's also not uncommon for multiple families to live in one household, um, including different generations, including grandparents, and different maybe brothers and sisters with who already have children. If we see it from the mainstream culture, we may see it as a deficit. Um, but again, it is because we are looking at it from our own perspective. Their beliefs translate into actions. Their beliefs translate um, into actions based on their traditions and culture. And artifacts or symbols, for example, especially among Latino Catholics, if you go to their homes, it is not uncommon for you to see one of the statues of Virgin Mary or a crucifix because it is part of their cultural beliefs and the faith that they have. So it is a symbol that represents their faith. Okay, so as we think as how someone's cultural identity is developed or formed, we need to take into consideration the different factors that contribute to this ethnic identity development. It is not just about the cultural aspect that we normally think of, which is the dress, food, and traditions, but someone's cultural identity is conformed of the language they speak, their native language, the language that is spoken at home, whether it is the same language from the mainstream culture or whether it is a different language. Again, family life processes, like what are their beliefs, for example, about taking care of the elderly? What are their beliefs about the family system? Race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. That person grew up in poverty, They did grow up in the in an upper class family. Race, ethnicity had thus discrimination, societal discrimination, impact who they are. Healing, religious, and political beliefs are also part of someone's identity, and gender and sexual orientation as well. What is what are the changing ideas about culture and human behavior? So first, let's talk about cultural relativism. So cultural relativism frames contemporary multiculturalism in the U.S. So in the U.S., there's still conflict or different ways of thinking about diversity. So, one way of thinking about it is called romanticism and is reflected by those who call for respect of diversity in our multicultural society. And the other term is called enlightenment thinking, which emphasizes the ranking of cultures and and for example, with the recent debate over crime, public welfare, health insurance, um, often people thinking in this way, they believe that, for example, immigrants should not be eligible for these kind of public services. Another important concept is biological determinism. And basically, individuals who think, who believe in biological determinism, they believe that a person's intellectual performance is associated with his skin color. For example, that whites are more intelligent than blacks or other minority groups. But research has found that there is no difference in the composition and functioning in the brain of blacks and whites and Asians, Hispanics, and the different racial groups. As we have learned in previous classes, it is more about the environment and how it impacts the performance of different groups. For example, if a Hispanic or a black child live in a or grow up in a impoverished neighborhood where they don't have access to a lot of opportunities, including pre-K, libraries, and their parents cannot afford to send them again to pre-K or other um, early childhood development programs, they may not be able to compete with um, children who grow up in upper class neighborhoods and whose parents are wealthy because they have an early start and many different opportunities that they have. So again, in that case, it is not about race. It is more about where children grow up and the opportunities that they have access to. So there's a number of concepts related to culture in the book. I'm gonna try to go through them briefly. So the first one is ideology, and this is the shared ideas about how things are and how they should work. So, an ideology, for example, we can think about a political ideology or also an ideology about what we think of people in poverty. Do we think that it is their fault that they live in poverty? That it is because they're lazy? It is because they don't work hard enough? Or what do we think about immigrants, for example? Do we think that immigrants um, come to steal people's jobs, that they're rapists, that they're criminals? Or do we see immigrants as a group of people who come seeking better opportunities and they contribute to our country, they contribute to our communities? Um, People in poverty, do we see them as um, someone who is hardworking, but they're experiencing hardship as a result of many barriers that they face due to the environment they grew up in and barriers that they faced and um, lack of opportunities that they had. Ethnocentrism is a tendency to elevate our own ethnic group and its culture over others. So we may think that we're not ethnocentric. However, if we really reflect upon our own ideas, our way of thinking, our perspective, and perhaps if we don't respect the way others do things or their own beliefs, we may be ethnocentric without even knowing. We think that the American or the mainstream way of doing things is the correct way. Um, that means that we're not allowing our clients who are from different cultural backgrounds to be who they are, and we're not taking into consideration their strengths. Cultural symbols, again, they can be verbal or nonverbal, and they stand for something related um, to someone's culture. For example, social constructionists focus on how narratives and stories can bring about emotional and behavioral changes in clinical social work practice. Worldview is a cognitive domain about how we think about things. Cultural innovation. So this refers to how culture is not static, it is adapted and modified throughout interactions over time. Um, so, for example, recently we interviewed a priest in Indiana about the changing community in Indiana because about 20 years ago, the parents were or people were primarily first generation immigrants. And now those parents who arrived 20 years ago have children who are in their late teens or early 20s. And the priest talked about how the children can adapt so well in both cultures. So they can be, the priest describes it as, they can be in a mainstream American event and they can behave according to such culture or rules, and they can be in a Mexican party and they can be completely different. Their Latino culture comes out. So that's how culture can be adapted and modified throughout different interactions. And cultural conflict, it is that how meaning can be different or symbols can be used differently and can have a different meaning for different people. So, for example, for Black and Hispanic and Latino adolescents, um, if they wear, for example, baggy clothing and if the type of music that they listen to and um, the language, the informal language that they may use, um, it may for youth it may just mean cool, being cool, dressing hippie, but for law enforcement, it may mean that, or it may be for them a sign of drug and gang culture and social rebellion. Postmodernism is basically a term used to describe contemporary culture. So, um, so let's look at the postmodern view of culture. So about 40 years ago, culture of poverty was used to explain um, how the life developed by poor people to adapt to difficult circumstances. Um, wasn't necessarily used in a bad way. However, it twisted to suggest that minority communities were impoverished because of people's own beliefs, values, traditions, and morals. And in that case, mainstream culture, um, racism, and discrimination were not considered as factors that were impacting people's ability to overcome poverty. So, this culture of poverty was used in a negative way to argue against publicly funded social programs. And it is used even today um, to explain why people are on welfare, why there are poor single parents, and other crime problems of inner cities. So, again, it is not looking at the larger systematic factors such as racism, oppression, and discrimination. It is basically blaming people of color for the problems that they are facing. So, another term, cultural hegemony. Um, this is how one set of values, beliefs, and meanings dominates our predominant culture. And this is, happening in the US. Most would agree that this is happening, um, that there is more of a Euro American or Anglo worldview that is dominating our society, and leaders who are making decisions for our country have this view. So, a few other terms. So, what are common sense, customs, and traditions? So, common sense is a cultural system knowledge that is taken for granted in the community, and customs, solutions to problems of living. Traditions is a process of handing down beliefs and practices through generations. So, again, it is really important to take into consideration the common knowledge that is often taken for granted in the community. So we need to learn about what is that common sense or common knowledge. So depending on the population that you are working with. And again, what are their customs and what are their traditions? So let's move to the topic of immigration. So immigrants are someone who come from another country. So there's a theory called push and pull theory. And this theory talks about why or how immigrants are pushed from their country of origin because of different reasons or factors, including economic hardship, political and social oppression, and then they are pulled by their destination country by hopes of better economic opportunities and political and religious freedom. And the code of ethics from the NASW, it makes it clear that social workers should be serving immigrants during this time of transition, as they are, as social workers, we are ethically obligated to promote social justice and social change with and on behalf of clients. And we need to strive to end discrimination, oppression, poverty, and other forms of social justice. So, again, it is our obligation to understand immigrants, why they are coming, instead of judging and blaming them for problems in our country. We need to understand the reasons why they fled their country, why they decided to come to the US, and the mandate of the NASW, which makes it clear that we need to be working to promote social justice and strive again to end some of those difficult conditions of our clients, including immigrants. So as immigrants start um, integrating into the culture, there are variations in the way they develop a cultural identity. So, one way is called assimilation, and this happens when individuals abandon their culture of origin and incorporate primarily in the dominant ways. Um, Previous research has shown that this is not the most healthy way for immigrants because we are forcing them to abandon their cultural roots. Another term is acculturation. It is a process of adapting to a non-native culture that when individuals are from a different culture and they come in contact with a dominant culture. And enculturation refers to when individuals connect back to the culture of origin, recapturing the culture by learning about it. So the goal is for individuals, for immigrants, for the parents, and for the children to connect back to the culture of origin. And the goal is for them to become bicultural. So, what does bicultural socialization means? It means that individuals can master both the dominant and their own culture. So, again, that is a goal because research has shown that individuals are most successful when they are able to navigate both cultures, that they are able to succeed, they are able to navigate the mainstream culture, but they are still able to connect back to their culture. They have the support from their peers, from their ethnic communities. So even a child of immigrants who's born in the US, research has shown that they're most successful when they are bicultural, when they are able to integrate into mainstream society and they are able to still remain a relate or have a relationship with their parents, peers, um, from their cultural background because they are able to benefit from both cultures. Another way to look at it is through Berry's cultural identity model. So again, this model show us that if someone has a high cultural adaptation to the mainstream culture, but they still maintain their culture of origin, they are integrated or bicultural, and that's the ideal. If someone does not adapt to the mainstream culture and they only keep their culture of origin, then we say that they experience separation. And we see that a lot, especially among immigrant adults, because especially if um, they don't learn the language and they're not able to um, integrate into the mainstream society, they will remain separated from the mainstream culture. The other situation is when both, well, actually, assimilation, again, when they are able to adapt very well to the mainstream culture, but they remain very low connection through their culture of origin, then we say that they're assimilated. They assimilated to the mainstream culture, but they did not keep a connection to their culture of origin. And we have actually seen that that's also not ideal. And marginalization happens when they're not even neither connected to their cultural group or to the mainstream culture. So they're marginalized from both cultures. So again, as social workers, we need to strive for individuals, for immigrant parents and their children, to become integrated, to be able to successfully adapt to the mainstream culture, but be able to remain or have a contact or maintenance to their culture of origin. They seem to have more positive outcomes in terms of health, mental health, academic success. This is likely to be involved in gangs, um, and just do better off compared to their peers who are in other identity groups. Also, as we work with immigrants, we need to take into consideration the acculturative stress that they experience in the process of acculturating as they come in contact with the new culture. And some factors that may contribute to the acculturative stress may include whether their migration was forced or voluntary. Um, so in most cases it's voluntary, but people come fleeing certain situations such as civil wars, such as gang violence, organized crime, such as, for example, with the recent immigrant immigrant from Central America, and also the journey that they experience as they come through the U.S. Um, and the dangers that they experience, such as kidnappings, being experiencing different types of sexual violence, different crimes throughout their journey. Um, a lot of time that causes trauma. Legal status. So if someone has a legal status in the US, it doesn't mean that they don't have any stress, but at least that's not a contributing factor to the stress, because in a moment I'm going to be talking about how legal status specifically has an impact on the well-being of immigrant families and children. Perceived discrimination, that is also a factor that contributes to their stress. Language, what language do they speak? Socioeconomic status, did they move to the US or emigrate to the US seeking better opportunities because they lived in extreme poverty and they're still facing a lot of economic hardship in the US? That's a big factor. Family support, do they have family support or other social networks that is impacting them positively? Generational conflict, that happens when children start having more contact in the mainstream society, and they start thinking in different ways than their parents, and that causes conflict between the parent and the child because they no longer think similar in some ways. So, for example, I think among Latino immigrants, happens that parents still have the belief of, for example, that children must ask permission, and even if they're 18 and they live in the household, they still need to ask for permission, and children start believing that um, they should have freedom. They should no longer be bound by their parents' rules. So, again, that's another cause of generational conflict. So, again, in terms of legal status and mixed status families, what we call mixed status families are families in which at least one of the members does not have legal status. So, how do immigration policies impact these families? So, based on research that we have done, or I have done in Indiana, it impacts family because they live in uncertainty and fear. So they're in constant fear, and that causes a lot of stress. Policies and public safety. So again, like in terms of like traveling to work or school, could lead to negative interactions. So if they're driving their kids to school and they're pulled over by the police, they could potentially be arrested, detained, and deported. Um, Access to health insurance and social services. So individuals report that they face a lot of obstacles because they don't have access to insurance, um, and they're hesitant about applying for public benefits and insurance, even when their children may be U.S. citizens, because they're afraid of calling the attention of immigration authorities and being deported. Education opportunities. So, unauthorized immigrant children, it is very difficult for them to get scholarships and to pay in state tuition. So, again, having at least one member of the family generates fear and stress and may even be a cause of increased stress between children and parents. Because, for example, if children may not understand why, for example, parents may not drive them or be able to fly for a family vacation because if parents don't have their immigration documents. Um, and families may face isolation because they may try to minimize going out to the community, um, and again being at risk of being pulled over by the police. Because in a lot of states, um, in the majority of the states, immigrant families or undocumented individuals are not eligible to get a driver's license. These are some inventories that could potentially be used to measure acculturation stress, including the Hispanic Stress Inventory, the Multidimensional Acculturative Stress Inventory, and the Acculturative Stress Inventory. Again, what are the implications for our social work practice? According to the NASW Code of Ethics Standard 1.05b, social workers should have a knowledge base of their client's culture and be able to demonstrate competence in the provision of services that are sensitive to client's culture, to differences among people and cultural groups. The CSWE competency tool also indicates that we need to apply and communicate understanding of the importance of diversity in shaping life experiences and practice at the micro, meso, and macro levels. And we need to engage clients and constituencies as experts of their own experience and manage the influence of personal biases and values in working with diverse clients and constituencies. So again, um, what this tells us in a nutshell is that we need to demonstrate cultural competence as we provide services to clients from different cultures. We must be able to do self-reflection and see how our own experiences, how our own biases, how our own values may impact our work with diverse clients. So different terms related to these concepts. One of them is cultural awareness. So again, what is cultural awareness? We need to be conscious of the similarities and difference between peoples from different groups and even like with our own. So in the discussion for this week, you are asked to think about your own the own cultural factors that impact your cultural identity and how this may impact your work with others. Do you have any biases against any groups? And how can you confront those biases? So, cultural awareness includes also being aware of issues related to power, privilege, and oppression. We need to be aware of our own, again, of our own characteristics and how we may be imposing those values, beliefs, and judgments on our clients. Cultural sensitivity is similar to cultural awareness because both require consciousness of cultural issues and how they're affecting our practice and the people we serve. However, one can say that sensitivity goes beyond awareness because it requires a deeper understanding. So, for example, I can be aware of how discrimination of I guess I can be aware of the discrimination against African American communities, but I also need to understand how it is impacting their community. So I need to be sensitive to that. I need to leave my judgments aside. So I need to understand the issues that are occurring from my client's cultural and individual perspective rather than my outsider perspective. And cultural competence goes beyond the we need to be able to practice social work in a manner that affirms the values and the worth of individuals, families, and communities, and protect and preserve the dignity of each. So, what this means is that we need to have certain set of knowledge, skills, and values, and we need to be able to demonstrate competence in the provisions of services and be sensitive to clients' culture. Some people they believe that this term contains some sort of arrogance because like how can we as social workers have the competence um, like even if we read or take a course on the client's culture, how can we be fully competent? So that's where we have the term cultural humility because it suggests that it is not enough to learn about people through books, through trainings, but we need to view our clients as experts. And we should be the learners. We should be learning from our clients. We should be open to learning from them about their cultures because they're experts. Again, this is continuum of how someone you can go from being unaware to being resistant, contemplating, being aware, being sensitive, competent, and using a culturally grounded